This is DLG Striker, a challenger who climbed the whole way with Jhin Mid. We've covered every off-meta role for Jhin, from top to jungle to support, and this is the final piece of the puzzle. Our challenger believes this is by far Jhin's strongest role, and even better in Season 14. In mid lane, Jhin is a hyper-aggressive 1v1 champion, using his early damage to outplay challenger mids. No longer having to farm up and scale, right from level 1 he's playing aggressive, even having a trick to steal the enemy buff at long range from their jungler. But perhaps the most unique part of this player is that he's challenger with not only very high deaths per game, but also very low CS per game, averaging closer to a platinum player, but he has a good reason for it. Adding on a new build that transforms Jhin from being just an AD carry, turning him into more of a dive assassin. This guy plays less like a marksman and more like a Zed, flashing forwards in fights to burst priority targets. And with this build, he can even kill enemies with only his ult. This is an amazing player with such a good story, and it might be one of the strongest undiscovered picks for the new season. Let me show you how he does it. Season 14 is here, and I've never seen so much off meta. It's going to be a great year. But if you want to rank up and stay healthy this season, then let me introduce you to this week's sponsor, Factor 75. Factor can help you rank up in league and in health. Less decisions about what to eat means more brain power you can spend in game. Factor offer fresh, chef-prepared, ready-to-eat meals delivered right to you, ensuring you always have nutritious food on hand. Whether you're grabbing a smoothie for a snack between deaths, or want a quick chef-quality meal to eat between games, Factor has got you covered. And best part, no washing up after, so you can get right back into game. My favourite part of Factor is the amount of choice they give you. Instead of cooking the same meals over and over, Factor has over 27 options each week. Ditch the fast food and start your climb to a healthier lifestyle and higher elo today. Get 50% off your first Factor box, and free wellness shots for life using my link. That means you can choose 2 free wellness shots from the 3 available flavours for every order while you're an active subscriber. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Back to Jhin Mid and Striker. His story began in Season 4 when his brother came home from a friend's house, hyped about a new game. Ending their World of Warcraft addiction, him and his 2 brothers immediately got into League and have played ever since. Unfortunately, starting off in Season 4, only playing Yasuo and being hard stuck in Bronze 5. The secret to him escaping? Watching Yasuo highlights and trying to mimic the plays they made, using this to escape to Gold. But in Season 6, everything changed with Jhin's release. Right away he loved everything about the champion, from the cinematic, to the skills, to the voice lines and the lore. He was pretty much a perfect champion. From there he began to climb, Platinum that year, then one-tricking Jhin to Diamond in Season 7. To put it in his words, I began to think I was a god. Little did I know I was still trash and would become hard stuck immediately after. With his huge ego, he wasn't climbing, and in fact he received a perma ban on this account. His friend who had quit League offered Striker their account. He realised he couldn't afford to get this account banned as he didn't want to upset his friend, so he completely stopped typing. And this is where he also swapped to playing Jhin in mid lane, seeing the power of a high AD ranged mid laner, and this is what he attributes as the main reasons he was able to hit Diamond 1. But his ego was still there. That was until he played against YAMIKAZE. At the time he had no idea who YAMIKAZE was, with him being a challenger level Talon main, and also a streamer. Our player knew, or at least he thought, he was the best player in NA. His Jhin was rank 1 worthy, but in this game he got absolutely demolished by YAMIKAZE. This truly was his lowest point in League of Legends, with YAMIKAZE's viewers coming over to his stream and sending him quite a lot of hate. And in our player's opinion, he did deserve some of it. He was sick of being that person. So in Season 11, his life outside of League actually started to change. He started a new job as a personal trainer, improving his mental health and giving him a life purpose outside of League. Instead of grinding 24/7 and streaming, Striker had something else to work on. But in his spare time he kept playing League as a hobby, never typing, and actually improved to Grandmaster. But in the back of his mind he could never forget the YAMIKAZE game, something that caused him grief every time he thought about it. And when he picked Jhin mid lane, even years later his teammates would bring it up to flame him. In Season 13 he still could not break the Grandmaster ceiling, with the high elo AD carry meta slowing down, with champions like Seraphine and Senna spreading into the role. He felt so useless on Jhin. After a big loss streak, League of Legends gave him an opportunity. autofilling him into mid lane. Instantly the pick felt so much stronger than AD carry. Destroying mid lane, 4 wins in a row, he decided to keep going, climbing from Grandmaster to Challenger in a single week, 42 wins and only 17 losses on Jhin Mid. He'd done it, his favourite pick of Jhin Mid, in his new best role. Really, getting stomped by YAMIKAZE was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he says he would not be Challenger today without losing that game. Something that we can probably all remember the next time we lose a solo queue game. And let's not forget his 2 brothers who are still playing League 2. One of them is now on a League of Legends scholarship at university, hitting Challenger this year and qualifying for the NA Challenger League with Lit Esports. Watch out for Rockboom, and he may be joining the LCS soon. His other brother, Mounch, is truly where he got his toxicity from. 30 banned accounts and still going strong even after he hit Grandmaster himself. But enough about them, back to Jhin Mid. Why is he playing Jhin in this role? Well, the reason is very simple. Jhin has incredibly high early damage and high range. So against mid lane mages, he can bully and even 1v1 any of them early on. In bot lane, this is often irrelevant as Jin's so busy dodging CC, but in mid lane he can really focus on bullying challenger players to get an early lead, collecting more gold and more XP in this role, so he can go into mid game as a fight winning champion, taking no time to scale up. But there is a reason this is the only Jhin Mid in Challenger, as he has a very specific playstyle to make all of this work. Starting at level 1 with an Invade. The Invade enters through red buff, calling his team to follow him. One goal of this is to find an enemy to get a kill or an early summoner, but the main goal of this Invade is something much more unique. He wants to get a ward down on this buff and then leave. He isn't just going for vision, he has a plan. Returning back to lane, he takes his W first, the long range route. As he is slowly hitting the first wave of minions, he keeps his attention on this red buff. Whenever the enemy jungler starts on red, his plan kicks into action. If the enemy jungler doesn't smite the buff or smites at the wrong time, Jhin can W over the wall to last hit the red buff. This immediately tilts their jungler and tilts the enemy mid laner, as well as giving Jhin a great damage and health regen advantage in lane. The enemy jungle has to perfectly smite it every time, or they're going to lose the buff. And all Jhin has to do is start the ability he wanted to anyway, as even if this trick doesn't work, W at level 1 is still great for Jhin Mid. This ability allows him to wait for the enemy to be CSing, walking up for a free auto attack, setting up his W mark. If he lands it, he can auto 2 more times before the enemy can disengage, letting him use a 4th bullet for a huge trade in his favour, then getting the free speed to disengage right away. Taking Q at level 2, he's aiming for perfect early CS, but he's now also looking for a grenade bounce onto the enemy, which is much easier in mid lane. By counting the amount of minions that are left, he aims to find a group of 2 or 3, then using the Q on the minion furthest from the enemy, it bounces its way over to hit the enemy mid laner. This again sets up a passive mark to root them, and give him another trade window. If timed correctly, he can get a 4th bullet into another Q, thanks to the low cooldown. In lane, he tries to poke as much as possible. Jhin Mid, just like Jhin top lane, has huge damage and a range advantage in most matchups. He always looks to solo kill at level 1 or level 2, since the 4th bullet is basically another spell, and most mid laners will underestimate Jin's damage. It's not just about the kill or the gold. It's really about tilting the enemy mid laner, as he believes a lot of League is truly just mental. He doesn't have to all in, as enemies usually do it for him. They see a vulnerable Jhin Mid, and they just go in. However, our player takes heal, aiming to predict the enemy ignite and use it before, giving him a health advantage to win the 1v1. The speed from heal also allows him more freedom in the fights to dodge skill shots, kiting while he does damage. He also really likes it for the jungle skirmishes for the same reason, using it like a slightly more defensive version of Ghost. If enemies don't want to fight, then he can use his early power to fast push 2 waves, and then look towards his bot lane. Especially if the enemy bot lane is pushing, this is a perfect roam for Jhin Mid. Sometimes this play can win games by itself, so it's something he looks for often. Enemies will never expect a Jhin to be roaming to their lane. At level 3 he grabs his traps and starts to set up his vision control. With the new map he has new spots for this, but his goal is still to place them in areas where the enemy jungler might walk. So he has this specific setup of ward in this bush, then a trap here to block the jungle entrance, and this trap to block the extra gank path, letting him play safe towards this side of the lane. If the mid lane matchup is super aggressive and really likely to jump on him, our player also places some down in lane on top of himself, so that anytime the enemy does go in, they're slowed and he can escape. This pick can 1v1 most mid laners before level 6, so he aims to get a big lead before then, as at level 6 he's at a high risk of dying 1v1 in high elo, especially with mages and assassins unlocking their high damage ultimates. However, in lower elos or against weaker level 6 mids, you can risk a big trade, and then retreat as Jhin gets his ult. This ability is so wide it's really hard for mages to escape. but it's especially good for anyone who wants to try this pick. So from this point, he stops playing so aggressive in mid lane. He saves his advantage and uses it to play with his jungler, helping with invades and ganking bot lane at long range. One big advantage he hangs on to is how fast he pushes wave while also threatening the enemy mid. He can kill the range creeps with W and Q before the enemy mid can do anything about it. So he may not be allowed to roam, but neither is the enemy mid laner, forced to stay and catch wave. So this weakness will balance out. His biggest problem in mid lane is his lack of mobility, so he must avoid risk as much as possible. Luckily Jhin has the perfect tool for that, ulting from a safe spot in his jungle into a dangerous river fight. Since he's mid lane with the accelerated XP and gold, as well as a cheaper lethality based build, the ult actually does do damage, so he's able to contribute to the fight even in a bad spot. Mid game is tricky as Jhin is not a good side laner, so instead of opting into a bad play, our player stays in mid lane, standing behind his bot lane in Fog of War, so whenever they start a fight or get engaged on, he can turn it around, using his root and the damage from Fog of War, surprising enemies who expected him to be in a side lane. And this is where he'll likely fall behind in CS, as he can't be in a side lane constantly to get all of the gold. So to balance out his disadvantage, he aims to get a bigger advantage for his teammates, grouping up with his jungler and helping with every objective. It's quite bizarre that this works, as usually this kind of play is a reason why players aren't in high elo, fighting too much and not getting enough farm. However, for this Jhin, that is not the case, even though he is falling behind in farm a lot. I believe the main reason this works is that he does have a lot of damage, so if there is an objective, he's there really early and will kill it before the enemies can respond. If there is a fight, his W and his ult are immediately ready for that as well, able to engage on anyone who's around. He doesn't even have to get the kills himself, as the slows and damage are useful regardless. As long as he is baiting enemies into taking fights, then they'll be losing the CS and XP as well, so he's not really falling behind. It just shows you can really have success in your own style, without having to fit into the box of being like other challenger players. Teamfights on Jhin Mid are all about balance. Ideally, he always wants to be at long range, using their AD from these items to guarantee kills with his ult with no risk. But unless his team is ahead, this isn't usually enough. So after the fight has begun, enemies have used their dashes and his ult is used up. That's his window to enter the fight. Jhin as a champion, and especially this build, is not a tank killer, so he tries to use his burst on squishies to kill them and eliminate all threats, cleaning up the tanks and supports afterwards. He is not playing front to back teamfights and will flash forwards with a force shot or a grenade to get a shutdown if he needs to. It's much harder to play this way, but also allows him to win every single fight by himself if he plays it correctly, and this is why he averages quite a lot of deaths for a challenger player, but as long as each death contributes towards a victory, then he doesn't mind. In late game, our player says that Jhin Mid scaling is pretty bad, especially compared to challenger mage players, and he's correct. However, Jhin as a champion itself, especially outside of challenger, does have great scaling and damage. It's specifically a high elo problem that this pick falls off. For everyone else, this pick is great throughout the game, as your enemies won't be as strong. To give this pick a rating, since the game has changed so much this year with the new items and the new map, we need a new tier list, as even some of the completely dead old builds have now swapped to being in an S tier, which I'm really excited to show. I'll leave a few of the unchanged picks now as reference for how OP or terrible this pick is. Jhin Mid is so unique in this lane because he doesn't play it like an AD carry, he's playing it like a mid laner. Instead of being safe, positioning well, and always having an escape route, he's really getting into fights, dealing damage and then dying when he needs to. The advice we always hear to get in high elo is to reduce your amount of deaths. However, Striker is a perfect example of how you can use deaths for your own gain, rather than just to give enemies gold. This means that sometimes this pick requires you to make very complicated decisions in situations where poking wouldn't be enough damage by itself. And I'd say the reason he's challenger rather than master or diamond is how good he is at using this burst aggressively. He does want to ban Zed, and ideally also get Ziggs banned by his team, as these matchups are hard to survive, or too long range for him to get an advantage. He loves playing against any other melee champion as well as any other mage. The good matchups are so much more common than the bad ones. His main build for Jhin Mid is all about burst, however he can pivot if he needs to, starting Doran's for the early damage into Ghostblade, then Collector every game. Against tanks he can then get Lord Dominic's Regard, or against squishies he can go Rapid Fire Cannon, giving him the longer burst distance, finishing the build with a Guardian Angel or a Hex Drinker, showing he really does want to take some damage, even if he's dying for it. For his runes he goes the same every game, Dark Harvest with damage stacking runes, and then Coup de grace and presence of mind in his secondaries. Striker is streaming again after hitting Challenger. Please check him out at the link in the description to make sure his mental stays positive. And thanks again to Factor for sponsoring this video, the perfect way to get your healthy 2024 started with chef cooked meals delivered right to your door. Link in the description. Thanks so much for watching.